Today's talk will be given by Peilei Fan, professor of urban and regional planning at Michigan State University. She has a Ph.D. in economic development and an MS in electrical engineering and computer science, both from MIT. She served as a consultant and economist for the United Nations University's World Institute of Development Economics Research and the Asian Development Bank. Her research focuses on urban environment, sustainability, innovation, and economic development, planning, and policy. Her research projects have been funded by NASA and the National Science Foundation, and she is the Secretary General of International Association of Landscape Ecology. Today, she will be speaking on urban environmental change in post-reform China. Please join me in welcoming her.
Good day, everyone. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, and thank you very much, Mary, for your kind introduction. Today, I'm talking about urban environment changes in post-reform China. I know nowadays, actually, people are really concerned about another problem in China now. But however, this is my specialty, urban environment changes. And probably at the end of my talk, I will also link with what is happening in Chinese cities and what is sort of like relationship and perspective from the urban planning perspective. So I'm from down to the road of 96, not too far away. So it takes a while to adjust from green and white to blue and yellow. However, I think here, what we're concerned about China's current problems, what I can contribute a little bit is about, from my own research angle of urban sustainability and environment changes. So first, a little bit background. Let's see. Okay, Mary already introduced me about my research and funding situation. And as a rule, I always acknowledge my kind founders who enabled I conduct research in the area that I'm interested. And I also want to specifically mention two projects I have worked on. One is China's urbanization and sustainability under future climate change, funded by NASA, which started about like 2009 to 2013, ended 2013. The other one is urbanization and sustainability under global change and transitional economies, synthesis from Southeast, East, and North Asia, SENA, which I dubbed this name for this region. Both projects provide me good opportunity to examine the situation, specifically in urbanization and sustainability. This is, for instance, the 17 urban systems overlaid in the ecoregion coverage of the SENA region. The overall theoretical framework for me to examine the urbanization and in terms of its relationship with other aspects is I look at the drivers, socioeconomic and physical drivers, and then looking at the coupled human and nature systems. And you can see urbanization and urban sustainability is a key, is a centerpiece. And then I look at the impacts. This includes land use and land cover change of cities, as well as environment, particularly green space, air pollution, urban heat island. In the theoretical foundation, I looked at, I sort of like getting my nutritions, is coupled human nature system, telecoupling, urbanization, economic linkages, series on rural-urban migration, syndrome approach, urban environment transition, Kuznets environment curve, etc. So with this big background, I will jump into the sort of like the first serious urban environment problem of China is urban air pollution. This is probably the most serious problem that got into international attention in terms of PM 2.5 concentration level of Chinese cities, and the famous Beijing cough, that foreigner will get the symptom of coughing and then they disappear after they return to their own country. So look at urban air pollution. You can see that the global average concentration of PM 2.5 for urban areas is about 40, and this is WHO's data. And for developed region is about 12. Western Asia is quite high, 50, and Eastern Asia is about 52. And into if we look at China's situation, Chinese city was averaged at 51, okay? And the 500 most polluted cities worldwide in 2016, the data is a little bit outdated. About these 500 cities, 283 are Chinese cities. The only other country that can compete with China in terms of urban pollution is India. So this, you can see, it's really a very serious problem. And also 56 Chinese cities were ranked as the top 100 most polluted cities. And the public health impacts of urban air pollution is quite severe. Worldwide, we have about 3 to 7 million deaths per year. And for China, it's about 1.2 to 2 million can be contributed to air pollution annual deaths. And even nowadays, we're talking about coronavirus, and that the death toll is about 1,000. So this is basically, I want to sort of give you a reference point. And this is about the Chinese cities ranked the top 100 most polluted cities, some of them. This is only part of the table. And so what has China done in terms of air quality monitoring? And, this is basically a new ambient air quality standard in China. And you can see that they actually sort of like following the exemplified standard of EPA and also in terms of the pollutants they monitor, including SO2, NO2, CO, O3, and also PM10 and PM2.5. So this is quite standard. And they have a overall air pollution index, AQI, to calculate as a maximum AQI of all pollutants included. And however, this new standard was actually implemented after 2003. Before, it was only SO2, NO2, and PM10. So PM2.5 only get into the attention after 2013. Everyone probably still vividly remember why this got attention. US embassies self-monitoring system actually really got people's interest and pushed the sort of a government also include that pollutants into their monitoring system. So in terms of the dynamic and drivers of urban air pollution in China, spatially the most polluted regions are in China's densely populated eastern region and industrializing central region, with the northeastern corridor from near Shanghai to north of Beijing particularly intense. In terms of temporal change, in the 1970s, the air pollution problems mostly are caused by black smoke from stacks of many industrial sites. In the 1980s, many southern cities have serious acid rain pollution in the 1980s. For the 1990s, air pollution due to nitrous oxides and carbon monoxide and photochemical smog become prevalent. In terms of drivers, meteorological condition, industrial facility, agricultural facility, and biogenic emission for PM2.5. So all these are, I only can give, within the limited time, I only can give you sort of a broad brush picture of the air pollution problem for Chinese cities. And this is basically the PM2.5 concentration in selected cities in China from 1999 to 2013. This data is basically derived by satellite imageries. As you know, some of my projects are funded by NASA, so one good resources for data is actually from satellite imageries. You can actually extract any part of the world, the different pollutants concentration. So this, for instance, is for Chinese cities, and you can see the increase in trade for air pollution measured by PM2.5, and later on also NO2. And Beijing actually is a significant higher level, has a significant higher level than the rest, and the gap has been increasing. And for Nanjing, Hangzhou, Chongqing, and Shanghai, they gradually increase their concentration level of PM2.5. They're sort of like in the middle range. So this is Beijing, and these four cities, Nanjing, Shanghai, Hangzhou, and Chongqing. And then there are cities in the semi-arid area, like Huohaut, Lanzhou, Urumqi, and also Shenzhen, not semi-arid, but another city in my database. They all have a very quite stable trend for concentration level. And this is the NO2 concentration. For those who actually studied the different like urban environment, particularly air pollution, you probably understand that different pollutants actually indicating different kind of like driver forces for pollution. So I also put here the NO2 situation. And you can see Shanghai actually this time taking the lead role. And the dynamic of other cities is similar to PM 2.5. So one area of my study is looking at the Greenspace impact for urban environment. So in one of the paper, we look at the urban Greenspace impact on PM 2.5 concentration. So this uses a case study of Nanjing. The Greenspace affect the spatial temporal changes of PM 2.5. Our hypothesis is green vegetation had potential to reduce PM 2.5 concentration, but only at accepted specific seasons and scale. And we actually found the PM 2.5, first of all, the spatial pattern, they are very highly correlated with green cover in spring at 1 to 2 km scales, highly correlated in autumn and winter at 4 km scale, and moderately correlated in summer at 2, 5, and 6 km scales. However, a non-significant correlation between green cover and PM 2.5 was found when its level was greater than 75 UG per cubic meters. What does that mean? That means if the PM 2.5 concentration level is too high, it doesn't really matter if you have green space or not. And across the Nanjing urban landscape, the east and southwest part has higher pollution levels. And then the other aspect of urban environment change I look at particularly is urban heat island. As you are aware that we're getting hotter and hotter every year in summer. So the urban heat island research has been particularly very popular these days with researchers, especially for European cities. Not so much in the US context. I have many colleagues in European universities. They're really very focused on this problem. And the urban heat island definition is basically, if you're not familiar with the concept, it's basically the high atmospheric and surface temperature of urban areas than the surrounding areas, surrounding suburban and rural areas. It is well recognized as one of the most conspicuous impacts of urbanization. Negative impacts of increased energy consumption for cooling due to the uncomfortable outdoor thermal environment and public health concern of growing mortality rates. And every time there's a heat waves, we got reports about how many people died from the heat wave, especially senior citizens, and overall decrease the quality of city life. The data calculation method is looking at difference of air temperature between urban areas and rural areas. And you can also use satellite imagery data to getting that information. Some of them are quite coarse at 1 km resolution. Some of them can actually get quite high resolution. And we also, there's also diurnal and seasonal and between city differences of urban heat island. So the potential drivers biophysical, impervious surface cover, basically the cement coverage of the cities, and land cover characteristic, especially green coverage and water, ecological setting and climate zones. And there's also anthropogenic factors, including population size, road density, economic development such as industrial area, building energy use, etc. What is the situation for urban heat island for Chinese cities? Contrast to the global trend, urban heat island effect at nighttime is greater than daytime for Chinese cities. So research has found out that. And also the overall city population at nighttime urban heat island is not significant, statistically significant. That's another sort of contrast to the general city trend worldwide. And aerosol or haze pollution levels significantly enhance the nighttime urban heat island for Chinese cities. So this might be the potential reason for why Chinese cities may be different from other in the rest of the world. Also, the urban heat island is found stronger at nighttime than during daytime for particularly Beijing and Shanghai. And it's stronger in winter than summer for Shanghai and Beijing, different from the conclusion of some others on Chinese cities. So with this big broad brush picture of urban heat island for Chinese cities, we actually also did some urban heat island situation, using a case of Shanghai. We look at Shanghai's urban thermal environment change from 2000 to 2008. Again, used the Landsat satellite imagery data. And we found a change in intensity of the thermal environment at the urban core. You can see that in the 2000, it was quite intense, but the range is quite small, the scope. In 2008, obviously it's extended its scope. However, the concentration level, sort of like intensity, decreased. And the findings, the leading factor actually contribute to the urban thermal environment, including land surface modification, landscape configuration, and the anthropogenic heat release. Not too much different from whatever other people have found out, but we sort of confirmed in Shanghai's case. And we also look at, again, urban heat island Shanghai and its relationship with green coverage. This time we look at 4 different time periods from 1984, 1994, 2000 to 2011. We found the urban heat island again expanded in scope, and but with a scattered spatial form. Okay, and why the urban heat island in the 1980s and 1990s was stronger but smaller in area. In 2000 and 2010, it became weaker and larger in area. And if you sort of like connect that with urban heat, with the vegetation index, which is indication of urban green space, you can find there's an empirical relationship between that, and it's quite good. So the vegetation cover can substantially reduce land surface temperature. And there's a constant negative relationship between normalized difference vegetation index, this NDVI. If you do remote sensing, you probably will be very familiar with this index, which basically indicating the green coverage, and also land surface temperature in Shanghai in all periods. So that's our conclusion finding. So all these things pointing that urban green space is a potential important solution for urban environment problems. So what is the sort of the situation of urban green space in Chinese cities, how it has been evolved? If we take a look about 2 most important cities, Beijing and Shanghai, we can see that urban green space in terms of total urban green space, which is a bar, red for Beijing and blue for Shanghai, has increased significantly. However, the other important indicator is per capita level. So if we take a look at Shanghai and Beijing's value, the line, you can see that against this total increase of the total green space, per capita level also increased significantly. Everyone sort of like, I think everyone is kind of know about how many population we're talking about here. Shanghai is about 23 million, actually 22 to 23 million, and Beijing is about 20 million population. And this is including the non-hukou population. So it actually increased from 1980s to the current level, like significantly. So however, against this population increase, you can see still the per capita level of green space increased. So this is a very positive sign for the Chinese urban environment. Obviously, there's also some other issue in terms of accessibility to green space, and whether or not this green space are distributed spatially sort of like reasonable is another issue. However, just looking at the index, we already see the significant increase. And in another paper, we look at the Shanghai green space changing. And this is basically, sorry, the font is too small, but basically you can see the Shanghai's per capita green space increased from 0.1 per capita, basically that's 0.1 square meters at 1949 level to 12 square meters at 2014 level. And then in terms of the major economic and planning context, I put it there, don't have time to go through that. But the point is the Shanghai municipal government has put in quite a lot of effort in terms of policy level to push for this green space increase. You can say that this is probably also another transitional economy's characteristic, that the local government were able to actually really pushing that against the sort of market rule in terms of how market valued the green space. When we put all this together in terms of urbanization, economic development, and urban environment problems in the big context, what we found is in terms of air pollution, green space per capita with urban population, because there are quite a lot of theories talking about the issue of urban environment problems and with economic development as well as city size change, we actually find out that increase of urban population does not necessarily lead to severe environment problems, such as air pollution or decreased provision of urban green space. So you can see the first graph is about NO2, and the second is about PM 2.5, and the third one is about urban green space per capita. Some of them are actually this relationship, like negative. Some of them are showing nonlinear relationship, but you can see there's actually a changing point, sort of like changing direction point. And some of them are showing like positive linear relationship. And if we take a look at about their economic development, you can see that, so now the previous graph, you have resident population here as x-axis. So here, if we change that to the GDP per capita as x-axis, see the relationship of the same environment indicators, you can see basically, you can see that economic development help to alleviate environment problems such as air pollution and lead to more provision of urban green space. But for different pollution, the dynamics can be different. So this is for the NO2 situation, and this is for the PM 2.5 situation. And in terms of the urban green space, looking at the post-industrialization and globalization. So for another city, Shanghai and Barcelona, we actually compare Shanghai's experience with Barcelona experience to see, because when you talk about Chinese cities, we tend to only focus on Chinese cities, but I think a comparative perspective actually sometimes can yield some other insights. Barcelona is a city already experienced post-industrialization, and Shanghai is experiencing post-industrialization with non-industrial service sector actually contribute more to the GDP overall. So the research questions, what are the spatial temporal changes of urban built-up land and green space in both cities? And what are the relationship between economic development exemplified by post-industrialization, globalization, and urban green space? So we kind of sort of putting all this seemingly unrelated problems together, post-industrialization, globalization, and green space. You would think probably they're not really related, but our finding shows that economic development actually has a direct and significant influence on urban green space for both cities. And actually, post-industrialization had served as a main driving force. And there's also impact of globalization. So aspiration to become a global or globalizing city, which basically achieving a high status in the global city hierarchy, and institutional shifts such as land property rights in market economy versus a transitional economy actually played a kind of like important role for both cities' situation of green space change. And this is, we actually use the model, quantified model to actually show that indeed the relationship exists. So this is a SEM model. Finally, relating to what is happening, what is my research area. So I try to sort of give you sort of my own thinking reflection about the urban environment transition in Chinese cities. So the urban environment transition theory is basically saying like, cities at different development stages, they will have different environment problems. And according to that theory, Chinese cities most can be classified as industrial cities, lying between the two extreme groups of poor cities and affluent cities, therefore bearing the environmental burdens of at regional scale and more temporal scale, such as ambient air pollution. However, Chinese cities also have environment problems of poor and affluent cities, although not to be at a prevalent extent. China's carbon emission per capita is 6.18 tons in 2011. This is a really outdated data. I should update it. Much less and only a fraction of other countries. And then total carbon emission was close to 40% of global level in 2008. So this is really a very big contributor to global climate change, and almost double of the US. However, if you look at per capita level, that's a totally different story. So I just want to sort of like highlight the importance. If China can have some change, then the contribution to the global level is significant. And in terms of the regional and intra-city perspective, there's a great regional variation in urban environment problems. As mentioned, most severe air pollution occurs in northern and east coastal region due to both nature and the socioeconomic factors. And certain measures at individual cities can actually alternate their development paths. And there's also need concerted effort at regional level. For instance, Beijing's improvement in PM 2.5 versus neighboring industrial regions appear to have worsened conditions. That was actually partly resulted from Beijing's control, relocating those industrials from Beijing's region to their neighboring region. And there's also intra-city perspective. We need to consider various location or community within a city boundary. And for instance, I mentioned before the Greenspace accessibility. One of the research we did is to look at accessibility of public green space in Shanghai. And this is what we found, the graph. The first one is looking at the spatial distribution of green space accessibility index. So the warmer color indicate high level of accessibility to different types of green space in summary. And then this is sort of like an overlay with population density. And we actually identified hot spot and cold spot. So you can see that those cold spots and located at certain level of population density are in urgent need for substantial improvement for green space accessibility. If you're interested, you can read the paper in detail, but I just want to emphasize that even at the intra-city level, there's an equity issue that we need to concern. In emerging issues, socioeconomic transformation, the environment impact, I would like to mention that the rising urban middle class is really contributing to the rise of home and auto ownership that, for instance, every 5 people in Beijing, 9 people in Shanghai own a small passenger car in 2017. And this number increased again for 2019. And there's also China's largest e-commerce market. The environmental implication for all this is huge. And there's a rays of hope in terms of like the 3R, recycle, reuse, and reduce. So the recycling, sorting household waste, Shanghai's experience, especially last year, has been a sort of like big internet discussion among Chinese internet users. And the reuse, the online platform for second-hand markets are very active, and reduce 断舍离 to not to want to give away and to leave. Sort of philosophy started from a Japanese, from Japan, actually become very popular in China as well. So this is sort of Shanghai's how to sort household waste in Shanghai. Very complicated, it seems. And this is really for Chinese audience. They're quite sort of awed by these details. And however, then people start to have this a Peppa Pig guide how to sort waste. So you can, if the pig can eat it, then household food waste garbage category. If the pig cannot eat that, basically that's residual waste. And then if you can make if pig eat it and then will die, then it's a hazardous waste. And then if you can sell it and get pig or get pork, then this is recycling waste. Sort of like people's creativity. You can see that how to guide people to sort these garbages, and what happens to her when she eats certain garbages. And again, this is 断舍离 that I mentioned. Basically, you should not to want things to sort of like control the source of the waste, and then you should sort of give away secondary use for other people, and you should also to leave. Do not have this wanting mentality. Okay, so I think it's also quite popular in the U.S. Especially for California sort of like people. But anyway, this has become sort of like also for China's rising middle class. And now getting to the serious issue, this Caixin site I like to visit. This is actually yesterday's update. And you can see the total deaths is 909 and about 40,000. And this is today's update. The death toll has increased to over 1,000, and confirmed case is 42,000. So just one day, we have 2,000 more confirmed case and over 100 more deaths. So this is a serious situation. And this is, again, like sort of like people try to be humoristic about the situation. The security guard philosophical question, when you pass the gate for neighborhood, who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you going? So then he will give you a shot, seeing if you got a fever or lost your mind. Okay. So I want to mention these two characters, Wei. Currently, most people see Wei. What does Wei mean? Which is basically danger, and G is opportunity. So as an optimistic person, I want to see the opportunity. So talking about the coronavirus and challenges of Chinese cities, there's individual behavior change at a public health concern, mask wearing, and social network changing from offline to online. And building level, the central ventilation system, sort of like technology, sort of seen as a very high technology level for all the modern buildings has been questioned. So the old sort of like just open your window system, not to be connected with the central ventilation system, has been revisited. And the neighborhood level, you're already seeing the gunshot sort of like, pictures. So the neighborhood control and management has been sort of like putting into the questioning, and people has accepting that, but also questioning the principle behind that. At the city level, there's lots of issues, hospital beds, and number of physicians, and intra-city public transit system. People try to avoid using that. Intra-city, the highway, high-speed rail, and flights all has been controlled. There's a big governance issue has been put into debate in terms of transparency of the Chinese government at the central level and as well as the local level, leadership and the trust of the government from the people. So this is really another very good opportunity for Chinese cities rethinking about its path forward, especially under the current regime of Xi's era. And what I want to also emphasize, we can also learn history from the historical lessons. You probably, for our urban planning students, when I teach them the introduction to urban planning, I always give this, saying, hey, do you know actually urban planning coming from public health concern? This is the start of modern urban planning. And this time, the virus situation in China actually reminded us what planner can do. And so the public regulation, the sanitary reform, basically Edwin Chadwick is basically underlying the modern urban planning, construction of urban sewage system, sanitary survey and planning, and town-site consciousness. And as a result, we have the redevelopment as a solution. And also, I don't know why it's not showing, but also the redevelopment of Paris is another sort of example. And there's a relocation. There's several very famous visionaries and suggest that, including Robert Owen, George Pullman, Emerson Howard. This is some example from the past. So finally, with all this given to you and without really providing a solution and sort of like just throw the question to the audience, I want to say, this is a picture I took in Shanghai's most famous park, People's Park in the central city of Shanghai. A morning of June. It's very peaceful, 5 o'clock. I had a jet lag, couldn't sleep, so I took my son out to take a stroll in the park. I saw people dancing, and some of them are actually doing Tai Chi in the very precious urban green space. So with this, I would like to thank you, and thank you for your concern for the China's urban environment problems. All of you come to the talk here, so I suppose you are interested in this topic, and I welcome your questions and comments. Thank you.
Did your experience as an electrical engineer, and I assume you studied some control systems theory,
Yeah.
did that apply to your research? Do you use that as a tool?
Okay. Thank you. Many people are very interested in my background because it seems I'm coming from the engineering background and then finally doing urban planning. This is sort of like a typical example of Chinese students they are not really know what they want to do at the earliest stage of their life and then finally find where their passion is. But for me, because I studied computer science in my bachelor and master degree, the first bachelor is totally directed by my father. But the second master, the second degree in master is actually, I also want to study that because at that time I was interested in examine China's telecom equipment industry. And so I getting that training sort of easy to communicate with IMD engineers to know about their innovation. But I think the training in that side is beneficial for me. So for my doctoral dissertation, I actually did quite a lot of qualitative research. And then when I became a faculty member, I actually did quite a lot of quantitative research, or combined qualitative and quantitative research. So certainly it's very helpful for me to be experienced with models and not to be afraid of models to do the quantitative analysis. So I think that gave me kind of a confidence, even though I probably did not know something, but then I'm not afraid to learn it. So yes, it's helpful to be in a short conclusion, yeah.
Thank you for your talk. It was very, very interesting. One of the things that we know in the United States about mapping green space in urban areas is that you have to do it before the trees leaf out and obscure what's underneath, whether it's impervious surface or it's green lawn and whatnot. So have you taken that into account in your comparisons of changes in green space in urban areas?
Thank you for this question. When we actually, for instance, for this picture, you can see that underneath the trees, many are impervious surface. So we actually took the government data on green space. So whatever the government dedicated as a park, so we didn't go inside to separate into different space levels. So we would then designate it as a green space. And our resolution level is 100 meters for Chinese cities. And for the most US-based studies, they actually use many of them using like 500 meters or 1,000 meters, much coarse resolution. Because Chinese cities are highly dense, so we felt like 100 meters resolution is better for research to study the relationship. So we didn't go inside to differentiate different land uses. Yeah.
Hi, very nice talk. So I have two questions. The first one is, so I see you have a lot of data about the historical issues like air pollutions, like the heat island. So what are your predictions like in 5 or 10 years? Is it going to be worse or is it going to getting better? And the second question is because I would like to know about the difference between the different regions of China. So do you see this trend in the developed region, like the eastern side or the western side, there's a difference in there? Or you see there's a common trend? So that's my two questions.
Okay, so the first question is about prediction.
Yes.
I think prediction is a job for politicians, not for academics. So for most of my research, I look at like what has happened in the past. But if you really want me to say something, then I would think like urban environment problems in terms of in terms of air pollution. I see an improving trend in general. This probably because that at different levels, policy effort, there has been great emphasis in, from the top level leaders. And my own experience, for instance, this winter I went to Beijing, and I felt actually PM 2.5 level is quite good, was quite good when I was there. So I see this overall in recent years, the change of that, and obviously you see Greenspace keep increasing. And the urban heat island, I'm not sure because this is more related to actually the environment, the global environment change, and it becomes more and more severe. So it's probably not going to get any better because we're just getting too many days, like more and more days of extreme heat. And in terms of the regional perspective, one of the slides that I have, you can see that there are some sort of like conclusion I got from the literature. The severe air pollution, obviously has our regional differences. Northern and eastern coastal region, they have more severe air pollutions, both due to nature and socioeconomic factors. Of course, the nature factor, we have little control of that. But I think socioeconomic factors, government policy, as well as the post-industrialization, like Beijing and Shanghai experienced, and more second-tier cities have experienced that can transfer some of the air pollution problems to somewhere else. And what is the equity principle sort of problem there? That's another issue. We can start to say the origin is actually developed countries transfer the air pollution sort of like, from transfer the industrial production to developing countries. But in terms of like just the air pollution indicators, that's sort of I see a positive sign in terms of that. And in terms of the differences, it's hard to predict, I think, because for big cities in Shanghai and Beijing, I'm very positive it's going to get better. But for some other cities, I don't know. I think the central government leadership is very strong on this. Maybe, not only GDP now, environment performance has been recorded as sort of a way to evaluate your performance. So everyone is taking that very seriously. So the whole political environment is pushing towards that direction. Yeah.
Thanks for your talk. I remember earlier you mentioned that you did some work in Southeast Asia, and I realized that each country individually can't really compete with China in terms of pollution output. But I was wondering if you could comment on Southeast Asia as a region, maybe in comparison to China in terms of pollution or challenges with urbanization.
Yeah, thank you. If I can quickly go back to the cities, yeah. In terms of air pollution, for instance, like, you know, all this Northern Asian, Russian, how do you call that correctly? I was corrected by one of my Russian colleagues. Asian Russia, yes. He said that's the correct way to call that part. You know, it's because it's not only Siberia part, but, you know, you also have like, you know, this and you know, some other cities actually. So this Asian Russia part, it's actually very interesting. They have very different dynamic of urbanization. They started very, actually including Urumqi, they started very high level of urbanization, like 70%, and they didn't really changing that much. Their pollution level for Asian Russia is, because of the climate and other things, they're not that high. However, Urumqi is an interesting case. Urumqi can compete with Chinese cities in terms of severity of urban air pollution, especially because it's, you know, the winter time, it's the coldest capital on land. So the heating system is really problematic. The nature sort of environment condition not really helping it out. So Urumqi has very severe air pollution problem, especially in winter. And in terms of other Southeast Asia, they're not really like that high, but when we look at the Hanoi and Ho Chi Minh City, they are also relatively higher than some other Vietnamese cities. But then if you talk about like some other cities here, which my current project actually looking at some more Southeast Asia city, we haven't really started, but I take a look at the data, like Manila also has a very severe air pollution problem, and Jakarta as well. But however, Chinese cities still, in terms of level, is still like way ahead of those cities. Yeah.
I have a question myself, and since I have the microphone, I will ask the question. I'm glad that you brought into the talk the coronavirus, and I wanted to ask from an urban planning perspective, what do you think will be the largest impact, like on Chinese urban planning going forward? This is only since 2003, this is the next big outbreak, but do you think it will fundamentally change how urban planners think about Chinese cities?
I think this is a very big question. I think if we go back to what I mentioned, you know, at the individual level and the building level and neighborhood level and city level and the connection between all these units, the urban planners have been traditionally thinking about connecting. So no system has been prepared for when you need isolation. So I think a big change will be how to effectively isolating. And like for instance, and there's another issue is at different scale level. For instance, at the building level, you know, what would be the most safe way to design the air ventilation system, you know, not only for hospital but also for hotels and other places. So that's sort of at engineering level will be changed. And in terms of neighborhood design, and you know, in terms of how you can provide good enough green space, that's another issue. Should be, you know, urban planners has already thinking about in terms of number per capita level, but how do you exactly effectively using green space in some of this emergency situation, not only for the virus situation but also for flooding and other issues. I think nature-based solution will be gradually embraced by urban planner. And at the city level, in terms of, you know, there's lots of issues about public transportation. How can we like sort of improving that, you know, either intra-city as well as intercity to effectively deal with. I think there will be a big push to considering how do we deal with extreme events. Yeah.
Thank you for your talk. I think the talk is very enlightening, and one of the key takeaway that I had in this is when the air pollution is very high, air pollution, is the index is very high. The green space in the urban planning doesn't work, as you have shown in that in your analysis. So what would the urban planner do in the case when there's a high, air pollution? And yeah, that's my question.
So I guess this finding actually indicates there's a green space can only help so much. It's not the total solution. So you have to really think about like how to control the source of pollution. And then, green space is one of the ways to alleviate. So that's the policy implication. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, it is working. I have a totally different question. You talk about green space. What constitutes green space? I mean, that has to be planned too. And the slides you've shown tend to have all trees and bushes and things, but is that the only thing that's green space, or is there some planning on what kind of green space is the most valuable to people, to the climate, and everything else?
Okay, very good question. So when we are doing like urban green space analysis, so here, for instance, what we look at urban green space is official data, which is basically what government counted as green space is public parks, urban parks that's accessible to everyone. So that's what is defined as green space. So if a space is green, but it's not publicly accessible, like a golf course, or like maybe like a tree nursery, that would not be counted as green space. So our research has been conducted at this context, yes. And yeah.
There was a doctor in China, in Wuhan, who gave a warning for the danger of coronavirus. But apparently he was treated poorly from the government in the beginning, and anyway he died by disease.
Yeah.
And do you have a comment on this incident?
Well, I think this was very sad. Many people are saddened. I felt that's the saddest day I felt, when I heard that he was dead. So there is actually, many people reflect on what could cause this problem, why, different voices has been treated this way. I think many lessons for us to learn. I just think like every educated Chinese person, they learn a great lesson from this, and they're still reflecting and thinking what kind of thing we can do and to keep going. Yeah.
Question about the different park designs of China and the United States. So your last slide shows the park in Shanghai, right?
Yep.
So we can see that although the trees and the bushes are planted there, but the land, the surface is mostly covered by impervious material, right? That's very common in Chinese parks. But here, I think Americans are too obsessed about lawns and grass. So most of the park here is mostly covered by grass and very small area of impervious materials. I'm just wondering, can you give us any reason or explanations why there's such difference? Just curious about that.
Yeah, thank you for this question. It's probably from the history and the culture. If you know a little bit about Chinese history, and there's no sort of like public park, this concept, until like very late. Like for instance, Shanghai's the first park was actually built by foreigners, and for them to actually enjoy the green space. And traditionally, there's actually green space attached with temple. So that's probably the only sort of like place, if it's not private or the royal family's garden, For normal people, you can only go to outside of the city, like countryside, to have the refreshing air, or just go to temple when after your pray, you enjoy not necessarily actually green space, but maybe a pond of water with fishes, swimming in, you get a relaxation feeling. So, like for instance, this People's Park in Shanghai was actually built as sort of like a horse competition ground for foreigners. It's in the middle of the city, and then it was converted to a People's Park. Even though you see that actually mostly this picture cement area, but there's still some green space. And as you can see, like many trees are over the impervious cover. So for the small parks in Chinese cities, very dense area, they tend to be this characteristic. So with quite a lot, high proportion of cement area. And also there's like water and fake stone mountains. This is related to how you using the sort of like the limited space to quickly putting people into this nature setting with the constraint of length. So that's the situation. And when we do our research, that's why I'm saying like I cannot use 1 km resolution because it's just too close. And some of the parks are so small that you cannot even like catch it, like neighborhood park. So it's different kind of culture and density situation. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, sorry.
Hi. Of the air pollutants that you mentioned, they're all except for one, are the product of exhaust emissions of the burning of fossil fuels.
Mm-hmm.
But the ozone, the ground level ozone, is a photochemical reaction with evaporative emissions of hydrocarbons from gasoline sources primarily. Is there a policy in China to address that type of pollution?
For the gasoline emission?
Yeah. Ground level hydrocarbon emissions from evaporative sources, not combustion sources.
I'm not quite familiar about that part. Yeah, for the vehicle emission, there are quite a lot of well-known policies.
Because in America, we have regulations over the years since the 1990 Clean Air Act to address diurnal emissions from vehicles, where the vehicle just sits and it emits hydrocarbons through the valves on the fuel tank. Running loss emissions, where you have exhaust emissions while the vehicle is operational, and then refueling emissions. When you refuel the vehicle, it used to be the case that all the vapor in the fuel tank that was displaced by the liquid fuel would be vented immediately to atmosphere. And that's been addressed with regulations to control that emission on vehicles today.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that detail. Yeah, I can check and let you know later.
Well, I don't need to know it exactly, but I was just wondering if that was part of their policy change, because that's a form of regulation that was debated heavily in the United States, because it's a very small percentage of the total evaporative emissions, less than 5%, but a massive nationwide effect, because every vehicle had to be equipped with this equipment.
Yeah. Thank you.
I was going to make a comment about the parks. Why do they have the so much impervious surfaces and and I from visiting or living in Taiwan or Japan or China, the biggest difference is just the amount of usage these parks get.
Yeah.
If they were built according to American standards with a lot of green and a lot of lawn and whatnot, the sheer usage of so many feet packing the ground would kill all the grass and everything else. In Taipei, they have Forest Park, and it's practically wall-to-wall people, especially on a nice weekend day to an extent that an American park will not be.
Be able to sustain, yeah.
So that, this is a major difference.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I make a comment because actually in Asia, when Japan adopt the U.S. like say Greenspace or public park, they have considered they should be a ground for people to gather too. So that's why they start to pave the space and then I think they get popular in the entire Asia. So if when you go to Singapore and several countries I have been, they all like this style.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes, my question would be, I wanted to ask you more about different types of green spaces. I wanted to also know if you, how you calculate into your numbers things like ponds, lakes, reservoirs, rivers, how you do that. And then in relation to other green spaces, I'm thinking of like, you have areas like a marshy land or
like
something that would be for wetlands for animals and birds. Besides that, there would be, what else? Well, there's some other types of green areas that would go beyond, I think, what you've mentioned.
Okay, so for the green space, because we only calculate public accessible urban parks, so if it's not urban park, not accessible by public, then it's not counted as green space for our detailed calculation for certain papers. And if in the park you have a water surface, that's actually counted as just as this park area. So we don't differentiate that. Yeah, so that's the current situation. Green space, yeah. Even though the foot cannot step on the water, but we just generally count it as part of the urban parks. Yeah.
And you're right, we have an obsession with grass. It comes from a European tradition. Grasses actually don't work that well in our climate. It works better in Europe. Yeah, and I understand that grass is a very poor type of, a very poor item to reduce urban heat island. It doesn't absorb that much. And then I wanted to know about, we're just now starting to use permeable surfaces, permeable permeable asphalt. Unfortunately, for most of our city engineers, it's a bridge too far. It's very slow to adapt.
Yeah, I also want to mention that the permeable surface, also the sponge area has been quite popular in Chinese, proposed by a professor who was in Beijing University, who actually is still in Beijing University, landscape ecologist, and then become very popular in China in recent years. And I know that in Taiwan and Taipei city, they also has implemented some like sponge area, pervious surface to deal with flooding and other issues, and still providing green space. Yeah, so in Asian cities, they are considering about those new concepts and emerging. And in terms of the speed of implementation, I think we have to wait and see if that system, urban governance system, actually maybe have some advantage in terms of, for instance, the Chinese cities. I don't know. This again goes back to the governance issue, like which government system is more effective in this urban environment area. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for I only caught the tail end of your presentation, unfortunately, but I was wondering if you could comment on any effects you see of the recent reorganization of environmental and public space departments at the national level into the new Ministry for Environmental Protection that used to be distributed across a fair number of different departments. If you could comment on the effect that might have on urban planning or on how urban planners think about intervening in public space. Thanks.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Actually, I think this shows actually the merging of these two sectors, two ministries, two departments, indicating sort of like, I think it again shows the top levels leaders. He's thinking about how serious we should treat environment problems. And the fact that it's becoming our sort of like one unit, certainly in terms of power of administrative power, it's definitely increased. And I think it will be quite effective into looking at the environmental aspect of urban planning. Because before, the planning sector, like planning bureau, they mainly look at the urban built up area. So they have some control but little say about certain environmental assets. But now, since it's consolidated, it will be better coordinated and to have a more sort of like comprehensive planning for that. So I think it will be some positive impact. Yeah.
Thank you so much for your talk. I learned a lot. My question is about the driving factors for environmental change in China, and I was wondering, what is the extent of public awareness about environmental issues or community-based initiatives that might be driving some of the policy making? The one thing that came to mind for me was that I think in 2015 a documentary came out from Beijing about air pollution, PM 2.5, and that had a significant impact in Taiwan for the regulation of air quality of PM 2.5. So I was wondering, that's the background that I'm coming from with my question.
Yeah, thank you. I would like to say, in the past 1 hour, I emphasized the government, sort of like top leader, top-down approach. There's also like a driving push from the rising middle class. Like for instance, perhaps everyone has like an app that you can actually look at the air pollution, air quality index of your area. So many Chinese people using that. And that's the public awareness definitely increased quite a lot in terms of urban environmental issues. And because of this popularity and people discussing about in the WeChat forum and other things, and the documentary, one of the documentary published by a former CCTV reporter, Chai Jing, it was quite famous. So all this, and even like some middle class in Beijing, they are thinking about relocating their family totally out of the city because the severity of Beijing. So all this has been educating the public about the severity of air pollution and the consequence. Just like this coronavirus, this time people start to learn about virus and how it's being transmitted. Definitely, the public through the online forum has been educated to understand more about this and having this request of the government to push for the reform and policy changes. And I think there's also, in terms of like nonprofit organizations, they are pushing for like environmental issues. The nonprofit organization, non-government organization, is still kind of like a very sensitive area. But however, as far as I know, there's organizations, NGOs, they are working towards to make the change, to educating people and doing something like monitoring the water pollution level and also sort of helping people, like organizing people to recycle and like clean the garbage of like beaches and other things. So definitely there's a bottom up. You can see that being very active scenarios, and even like school age children has been involved. Many school children are now thinking about doing some environmental cleaning as their sort of like a vacationing part of the vacationing activity rather than just going to exotic places for traveling. So I think that's definitely improvement, progress of Chinese society in general. Yeah. Thank you.